with this upcoming part, we're going to take a tavern, a public house, an inn. These might be slightly different or the same thing, but different notions. But as many adventures start in such a place as you see here, in fact, this is what I call the Tumbled Wench. It's sort of the generic inn in my fantasy world. We're going to pretend that you're one of the adventurers here that is enjoying some liquid refreshment. And we're going to make a town, or even if it's not a part of the town, we're going to talk about what would be included in the region, right? Let's world build around a simple cup of beer and what you can generate in a world that would have such a thing. So if you have this sort of image of a, dancing, drinking, celebration, big roaring fireplaces, maybe even a lusty wench or two, because that's kind of what the stereotype is. I will now appear live in front of you all, and I may not be a lusty wench myself, but I am a gentleman of cherub demeanor who I hear has quite an adorable face. And there are two other quite handsome gentlemen up above me, who are from Rysky Brewing. We were talking to them in our previous segment about who they are, what they do. We were talking about history. We're talking about what is beer and how does it come to be. So now, through this discussion, kind of springboarding on the ideas that we were talking about before, why don't we build a town or something along those lines so that as a DM, when you tell your adventurers, oh yeah, there's a pub and you can get a cup of ale here for whatever, 2 copper pieces or heck, even maybe 2 silver pieces. There's higher quality beers as well. What does that mean?
We can tag back and be like, you can get a cup of ale for 2 coppers, or you can get their mead for 2 silvers.
Yeah.
Because there is a tiering of
production cost counts.
Yes. Okay.
I nearly died there. I'm sorry. I had to stop talking.
So I have MS Paint open, and I have OpenOffice. I have an OpenOffice word processor. Because look, being a DM, you don't have to go out of your way to have a bunch of expensive stuff. And I think we're going to help reinforce that with the tools at hand. Daly says, are we sure that Matty Morgs has never, in the vein of Mad Mardigan, attempted to disguise self as a lusty wench? Inquiring minds might never know. Well, Daly, if I had to tell you, or if I did tell you, I'd have to make sure that you could never speak of such things again. Physically, or that your reputation would be ground into so much mush or mash. Okay, so what I want us to do, gentlemen, and for those in the audience, I think it's safe to say let's go with kind of a Western European fantasy setting that seems to be very, stock, very common. And being the non-professional I am, but a very good student who listened to my professors in the last segment, I remember that one main ingredient in beer is water, or even in mead. And so we need a source of water, for life to exist, but let alone for ale. And so what are you thinking? Do we live by a lake? Do we live by a river, a stream? What are your thoughts?
Traditionally, the best water is either cold flowing water, which would be spring-fed water.
Okay.
Or lake water from generally a deep, cold lake. Warm lakes
flowing water would also have multiple benefits, because we're going to get to the part where we talk about the grain mill.
For sure, in terms of milling and also in terms of distilling, because if there are spirits, then that's where those come from. And those spirits generally would come from the same place as the beer.
Okay.
Not necessarily thunder. It depends on what kind of beer you're going for. You can use both.
You can use both.
Minerals make beer the exact same grains taste differently.
Stoke-on-Trent is one of the most common brewing waters we try to emulate, and it is hard as nails.
Yeah, it's as hard as a coffin nail.
Yeah, makes for incredibly bitter beer.
Yeah.
All right. So what I'm getting then, let's say that it's coming from a spring, and the spring is going to flow out into a brook or a river of some kind, depending on how large this spring is. And if
So
we want
why don't we start at some sort of elevation and end at some sort of water?
that's what I'm thinking, right? Because a lot of springs are artesian wells that are mountain water that's kind of trickled down through the rocks, and then through different geological forces has come back up in a weak area, has pooled, and then is flowing from there. So it has the minerals of the mountains, but it has also been filtered, and so it's maintaining the coolness of the earth, and also you get that. What all bottled water salespeople want to sell you is this cold, pure mountain water that exists.
Did you know that Evian spelled backwards is naive?
Whoa! Oh, here I'm going to give the Illuminati in the chat. All right, so
nice.
let's put kind of like there's a mountain range nearby. I'm just going to color this basically gray for right now, and then it comes up a little ways, maybe in the foothills, as a spring that is going to flow. Well, water travels downhill unless magic shenanigans, and so we're getting a sense of topography as well. All right, what's up next? Take me through the process here. We have water.
So obviously we need a source of grains, so there has to be some kind of agricultural production. So there's going to be undoubtedly the same the same growers of grains are going to be the same providers of grain to the bakeries, and so you'll have both.
Again, think of scale, like, right? How many people, like if you're creating grains for food and export, enough grain to make beer for the people that live in that town is a very small percentage.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So strictly for beer, for all of the townspeople in the surrounding and to sell, you don't need a massive agricultural area, but it depends on your campaign and if you is this area a larger producer of items for export? Is this a trade area where things are produced and sent from? Does it have a high traffic? There's so many ways you can go with your campaign that'll affect the size needed.
Those are good considerations, and you know what? I think that a town like this, if they're rested on a spring, then they're going to have downstream traffic, so they can probably send barrels on riverboats, or depending on how gentle the river is, send barrels down the river, kind of Hobbit style, if you remember.
There could most certainly
the Men of the Lake
there, and by all means, that provides a location upstream that can be used to impact the quality of the water downstream, thereby securing an industry because only their beer is clean.
That's true. There is a phrase that a certain excretion rolls downhill, and downstream of this town, you're getting the town in a chemical form.
So one question that we kind of need to know,
okay,
is what sort of period is this? Because the chat's making, do they make meads and braggots and ales and distilled spirits? All of those things sort of, like, are we building like the main alcohol producer of the realm? If that's the case, then we need to talk about garrisons and security.
I think to keep it thematic, maybe it's just a town or a small city that specializes in alcohol production. It might not be, a castle, a central part of the government, but this place with its very unique geography can specialize in making maybe a couple different types of beers, or we talked about maybe they make a mead, and then there's a couple you get more of a rot gut style beer that's just 1-2 copper piece, and then you can get a nicer quality as well. So let's focus on, especially because this is an exercise in brewing, what could be, you were talking about dreaming on paper about making a brewery. Let's make a brewing town. And this is what, maybe there's a monastery, right? A lot of monasteries in history for their own consumption, but also to sell to raise funds.
It's called Belgium.
Yeah, it's called all of Belgium.
Oh, okay. and various liquors, right? There's that Franciscan that's made from hazelnuts or something like that, I think.
Yeah.
And
that's actually
the strongest monastic tradition is the Belgian monastic tradition.
So if we have a cold spring from a mountain, and I have a lot of very light green on my map here, that's going to be our fields.
Holy old, we're making lots.
Take me through then. What is growing in the fields? If this is an agricultural, it's primarily agricultural, because even historically, heck, even the United States was, I think, 90% agricultural until the 1900s, early 1900s, or maybe
until heavy mechanization.
Yeah,
for sure.
So it's going to be probably barley, corn, rye,
wheat.
For sure. Yeah, traditionally wheat was even used more than rye. That's why the German traditional beers are beers.
But you said that hops was only a more recent invention?
Hops was later. I won't say it was more recent, and I don't think it would be unreasonable to consider hops be the crop.
That could be that could be the storyline of this community. This is the first community to figure out hops as the preservative and bittering agents and all of those things.
Okay. So this would help. This would help super specialize in brewing, and in fact, that might even be a fun adventuring hook. Is some kind of espionage, right? A rival kingdom or a rival brewing place wants to come in and take this over, or learn the secrets, or just sack the stores and take them off. And they're mountain barbarians, or they're the country that lives on the other side of the mountains. Okay, so we have fields that are filled with barley, corn, rye, wheat, and hops. Now, we do have this cold water, and I would imagine if we're going to grow these crops to be decent, when it comes to the weather, it should be fairly temperate, probably a moderate amount of rain.
Hops.
Anything sort of below the 37th parallel and above the Tropic of Cancer is.
Actually, I was going to say, we here where I live, we have a number of thriving hop farms north of the 49th.
Alberta grain is some of the best in the world. So
any temperate latitude can grow hops, and any hot and dry summer place can grow grains. So it certainly would not be untoward to see this in an England or a Sweden or Norway, that type of southern Norway, not northern. So the other thing that sort of plays in this is that this is a mechanism by which a town has a winter economy. Grain is seasonal; it's not year round. There's one harvest, maybe a second if you're lucky. Similarly, whether it's Groot, so that herbal mixture, or hops, you've got one harvest a year. And that harvest, that has to supply all of the production.
We'll get that plunder loot
for the year. Right? So if someone were to invade and set fire to the hop plants, that could greatly impact production. or if someone were to damage a portion of the harvest of grain or the stored grain.
Infection, infestation. There's so many fun little hooks that could be used in an RP situation.
Yeah.
It looks like Mr. Plunderloot was putting out a recommendation here also that you would need oak or some kind of other hardwood in order to make casks. I mean, the buildings of the town themselves, obviously, but in order to make casks.
Yeah.
You will need somewhere on your map, you'll need a forest of plunderable things to build a town out of, just like any town.
Are there other preferable woods?
Well,
you said
before
pine, right?
Ideally,
oak, pine.
For storage, it's hardwood.
Okay.
It's going to be oak. It's going to be cherry. It's going to be something like that.
Yeah.
But in terms of fermentation, there's also some reasonable potential for metalwork. Copper was heavily used for fermentation and cooling vessels.
Copper is still, to this day,
and for distillation, it's the best.
For distillation,
it's the best distillation material.
Absolutely.
There's right. You've got a big scary forest. That's a good one, Shlomo. Got a big scary forest for those oak trees.
Okay, so hardwoods for storage. You mentioned pine for tapping or for some other things.
It would be a small percentage of the wood used, and it certainly would be any soft wood. So I think it's probably simple enough as to not be necessary to worry
Then
about
an interesting question, did other things like root beer or birch beer start out as alcoholic and became more of a sweet non-alcoholic version?
Well, see, here's the thing. Birch beer and the root beers were alcoholic.
Yeah.
They were.
Absolutely they were.
And they tasted so terrible.
The ability to create de-alcoholized ones didn't occur until mid 1800s. You look at sarsaparilla, that was big in the Old West in the U.S. in the 1800s. Sarsaparilla was low alcohol. It was low alcohol, but it had alcohol in it. It also had sarsaparilla, which is a carcinogen, but we won't go into that.
It's also delicious.
Yeah, it is. Iron for sure for barrel rings. So you're going to have an industry, a steel industry of some kind, or at least a trade industry.
Mining. And that's an interesting point. Is while RPs typically think of the blacksmith as the armorer.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what blacksmiths do. They make barrel rings and they make horseshoes for the horses to go out and plow the grain.
And they make tools.
They probably only work on swords on Wednesdays.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I actually I played a campaign a couple of years ago where there was an armorer or a blacksmith who was only in town one day a week. And so if we wanted to buy something, we had to put in an order with him and come back a week later.
As we're building this, and I'm a stream of consciousness is great. In fact, we're bringing up a lot of real life stuff that we can translate into a game. Having a wandering blacksmith look, there might not be a blacksmith in every town. There might be one that goes up and down the river. But this town would need a blacksmith then to make nails and rings and horseshoes. We would need coopers.
Nails are for rich people, bud. They used to put houses together with wooden dowels.
Oh, yeah. We would need coopers, and those are different than carpenters.
Very much so. I mean, a cooper, most coopers that you'll see today, for example, are they're woodworkers. They just happen to specialize in barrels. Mm-hmm. I think, if you were talking about a small town, the same guy you went to get a new door would likely be the same guy that manufactured the coffin and would probably be the same guy who would make the barrels.
Depending on the scale of the town.
Depending on the scale of town. He may have...
But you have to think
apprentices
every single bulk good would come in a barrel that he'd have to make.
Yeah. Yep.
There were no canvas bags in the Middle Ages.
I remember, Luke, I believe it was from your video where you were going over the process of buying your own sort of distill kit, and you had a mesh bag of some kind. Like you were talking about canvas just now, but does cloth or some kind of linen or something for nets or strainers or something come into this kind of brewing?
Not strictly
in
at
this
all.
kind of, no.
No, not strictly.
That is specific to the modernization. That's one of the modernization and miniaturization tactics that are used currently. Like you want to strain the material that you get your sugars from away from the liquid.
Okay.
And once you have the sugary liquid strained away from the grain, that liquid is now called wort.
Wort? W-O-R-T?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that sugar water, like wort, is uncarbonized or unfermented beer.
Yeah.
It has no alcohol and no CO2 in it.
Yeah.
Sugar water.
So in terms of that production, there are a couple of things that are going to be critical too. Fire is necessary.
And controllable fire.
A controlled fire, so you're going to have a furnace of some sort.
Oh.
So you're going to probably need a brickworks.
Yeah.
Or the ability to procure brick. You're going to need something to burn. So you're going to either need hardwoods.
And that's why the forest, right?
Or you're going to need magical fire.
Yeah.
Or you're going to need coal.
Oh yeah, to mine up coal, or is there a term for a charcoal maker, or is that just what it is?
No, there is actually a name for that.
The ancient Kingsford.
In fact, charcoal is reasonably inefficient because in order to make charcoal, you have to burn wood.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of the brewing process, it would be an inefficient thing to do. Making coal for that or charcoal for that purpose would be inefficient, but burning coal would not. Coal was kind of not really in vogue until.
Would depend. It would depend, Shmuel. Again, so Shmuel said, do you think that they would have extra laws about keeping the water clean? It's a really good point. It would depend on the size and the decisions that the DM is going to make on the campaign. Like, this is a brewing town that has a specific thing. So I don't think it would be outside the realm of possibility if there was a dude with a longbow standing there, and if you went near the water, you got told to get away from it. That's
Hey,
the
Luke,
lifeblood of the city.
Hey Luke, check your mic input, man. I think you might have switched out. We're getting that popping thing, and I know that sometimes happens.
Popcorn.
It's
Sweet.
sometimes he lives in the country and he broadcasts through a very large potato carved into the shape of a Wi-Fi antenna.
Potatoes they can power clocks. They can do all sorts of stuff, apparently, including broadcasting Wi-Fi signals.
Yeah, but he's got a bitchin' water source 8 feet from his house.
The cleanest, highest, freshest ocean navigable water in North America is 80 feet that way.
So that's the brewing side in terms of the actual production. There are those few things. So there's the boiling process, so the heating of water, the milling of grain. We haven't gotten into the milling side, but
yeah.
A mill is not exceptionally complicated. It's just as long as there's a mechanism for bringing grain to it that has been malted. And we haven't talked about malting. Malting is a big thing. It's a simple process, but it is another process that requires certain tools to be in place. In order for a grain to be made into beer, it needs to be malted. And that process, for anybody who's unfamiliar, is the germination of a grain seed. So that's all we're talking about here is a grass. Barley is a grass.
Okay.
Wheat is a grass. Those seeds at the end of the season dry into their husks, and they fall off the plant, ready for next year to turn into more wheat. In order to brew with it, they have to be germinated. So what happens is that grain is moistened and treated with the right temperature until it sprouts. And as soon as the grain sprouts and the first leaf starts to pop out, cotyledon starts to break, and the germ breaks out of the grain, then that germination is halted by raising the temperature of the grain and effectively toasting it.
Okay.
So there's, again, a furnace involved with that process. Now, it could be, if someone was enterprising and intelligent, you could find a way to use the same fire, whether that be, a cavern underground with a, running lava channel, or, magical fire, whatever it happens to be. There is some mechanism there to dry that grain to be milled. If we're making flour to make bread, you just go and mill your dried grain.
Okay.
If we're making beer, you want to extract sugar, and that requires that process of germination. Absolutely, peat is another perfect source of fuel, although it's not easily regeneratable.
Sustainable.
You can't get more of it easy. Yeah. It's not sustainable. So those are two things too that sort of have to contribute. So, and if you think about to fulfill all of these obligations, a farmer can do it in his kitchen for his family. But if you want to supply a town, we've got a staff that we have to employ.
Yeah.
Right. So let's start with let's throw some of the key buildings or some key areas on the map. Maddie, what do you think? The things that we know that we're going to need.
Okay. Well, first off, the entire point of all this is we have some kind of an inn or a public house that is serving the town's in my game, the Tumbled Wench, the popular brew is called Old Wheat Water, because that's kind of what the beer is. It's old wheat water. But it also sounds fancy, right? It's like, oh yeah, a can of old wheat water, just like Grandpa used to drink.
Yeah, wheat water. Yeah.
What is this can of which you speak?
Yeah, right. Well, I'm sorry, a horn or a flagon
strange words. From
a pint of a made out of a lead container, which I don't know if lead would play into any of this too. By the way,
tin certainly would.
Tin
might.
We'll have to put that on the list of mountainous things to mine. All right, so we are going to have our primary brew house or our public house here. We're going to need some kind of grain storage.
Two different places.
What's that?
The public, the place where it is served, and the place where it is made would be two very different buildings.
Oh, okay then.
If you're making and I think this is what kind of Greg was alluding to, is if you're making enough of this product for a town and for export, you need a staff that is specific to this. You'll need a building that is designed specifically. We don't have in this RP some of the modern conveniences. So, for instance, if I want to get that extracted wort over to another vessel so that I can boil that wort before I introduce hops and yeast, I just hook a hose onto it and flick the switch on the pump and pump it over there. In RP world, the grain has to get taken to the very, very top of a 5-story building, and it needs to be prepared, that it needs to be inserted into a liquid on the next floor, and that all has to happen with gravity.
Then how about this? And this might actually reflect what has happened and why there are monasteries that brew. What if the farmers take the grains up into the mountain where the monastery is, which for cloistered reasons, religious reasons, maybe it's away from society as well.
Yep.
But what else do the monks have to do? They have the height, and they have the exclusion, and so it then actually the finished product would trickle down through the monastery or even through a network of pipes into some place, then be collected and brought back to the village as the finished product.
Are you suggesting perhaps a series of tubes?
Yes. A series of tubes that are some kind of I don't know, like a giant spider could make like an interconnected web of some kind.
Beautifully enough. Some of the early breweries. Some of the early breweries in Western Europe were 2, 3, and 4-story affairs.
Yes.
Where water would be elevated to
with great pain.
But often with the same equipment that a miller would use. Right? Yep. You may have a mechanism that drives buckets to the roof of a building to fill the first chambers or the first vessels, which would typically be either wood or metal of some kind, where that first process of extracting the sugar water would be. Gravity would draw that down a level to the place where it would be boiled. So now you've got another level. Then that would be drained off into a third level down where there would be fermentation taking place. And then from that fermentation...
That's the fourth level, because the third level is where you keep all the stuff to make the fire for the second level.
That's true.
And that would keep the monastery warm, too, from not only the brewing, but the fires up a cold mountain.
Now you've got a source. I mean, let's be honest, you also have to cool it. So now this is also a source of hot water for an associated buildings, or town.
Yeah.
And when Luke mentioned Heineken, he wasn't being silly. The Heineken factory in Amsterdam, which is 27 kilometers out of town, actually has lines that carry beer from the Heineken factory to taps in the city, where it is literally drawn right off the tap.
Yeah.
like an oil or gas pipeline, except
absolutely
it's
correct. Yes.
But you could, and Greg touched on this, and this is great. So after you extract your sugar water, you boil it, then you have to cool it rapidly.
Okay.
Use a thing that looks like this. So cold water recirculates through here. This is inside of the heat. Now imagine this on a massive scale, right?
Or
so
imagine
the heat is here.
Yeah.
Right? And out this side comes hot water.
Or imagine that very coil to be channels cut through a mountain or through stone.
Yeah.
Or consider that given these levels that we're talking about, where you've got certain things happening in different places, consider in the land of RP, these could be channeled through spaces, places that there is no knowledge of the previous or later stage. These could all be taking place underground with, or in the mountainside, and you've got certain people responsible for certain things.
Yeah.
I can see how this would go. You could take this in 12 directions if you wanted.
For sure. You could have this city that the most mild winters in all of the country because the lake water is 4 degrees warmer than anywhere else.
And therefore doesn't freeze in winter.
Exactly. And therefore the fishing is more plentiful. The industry that is related to any water-related industry thrives better in this community because the water's warmer.
Wonderful. That's great.
A lich runs the whole process and through dark rituals during distillation imbues the power of poor lost souls to power the machinery to make said equipment work, or even inlay the casks with ivory, quote unquote, that is actually made of humanoid bones as decoration. Ooh.
Hey, you got to get calcium somehow.
Yeah.
Calcium is an important mineral in beer making.
It is actually. Yeast feast on calcium.
Oh,
Yeah.
all right.
They love calcium. They like zinc.
Yeah.
Is that where the tin is coming in as a source of that, or?
Yeah.
No. Just, you could be the first person in the entire known plane to be serving tins of beer.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Leftover grain is absolutely animal feed.
It's
funny,
animal feed. It can also be reground when it's still wet and have like more water or whatever poured into it, milk poured into it, and it can also be breakfast.
Yeah.
And I did add we do need beasts of burden out in the fields too, and hey, you gotta feed your beasts of burden, and if you can recycle your waste, why not?
Yep.
Now that what you get as a byproduct is different than what you would give to a goose to make foie gras, correct? Or do you know that process, or
Not really.
No, not sure what you mean.
It's so you can feed some poultry alcohol-soaked grain to effectively give the poultry cirrhosis of the liver, which makes their liver tender
liver.
and fatty.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. This
The spent grain doesn't have alcohol in it.
Yeah, spent grain is purely mostly desugared grain.
Yeah.
So it's low caloric value food, but it is filling.
Yeah.
And certainly it would be ideal for the more impoverished folk working there. But if one was capable of reanimating, that would actually be that would be a good thing too.
Also, pneumonica, if you've got monks doing it, it's a full process because you use the grain to feed the cows. Cows make the cheese and the milk, and you use the milk and the cheese for your sustenance. So beer making is by design very balanced in a community. The only thing that a brewery, even a modern brewery, really wastes is water.
And one would argue it's not waste if you drink it.
I understand.
But yeah, that's the real waste product is water.
But the real waste is that warm water. Right?
Could that not be like channeled out into the fields, or is it kind of contaminated to keep stuff from growing? Or
nope, it's
steam.
It's steam. It's warm water. You're using the same water source that you have boiled. So say the lake is. I'm going to use general numbers. The lake is 10 degrees. The beer is 100 degrees. You pump the cold liquid through to cool the beer. Now you have two 45-degree liquids. One is sugar rich and one is just hot water.
So
and all of that hot water has to go back to whence you got it from, and that can have ecological impacts or benefits. Depending on how it's managed, but that is even in a modern brewery, that water is the only waste product, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Basically, everything that comes in can go out to a source.
Yeah,
the grain goes out and it gets sold as feed. Water goes out the case.
And Anheuser-Busch sells their grain to cattle farmers.
Derek, for sure, anything that's being used to transport this is going to be, and in many cases, it's considered disposable. There isn't, there really isn't a notion of, but I guess this is part of the RP side.
Here in our village, brewing is in our bones.
Yeah,
I like it.
if you are exporting product beyond the local town, anything you use to package is gone. So perhaps, you need to have a group of people whose responsibility it is to recover those casks. We have that in modern day. Kegs go missing. That's why you pay a $75 deposit on one.
Yeah.
Because they cost $100 to make.
And by the way, don't steal kegs, guys.
Yeah.
Unless it's got Anheuser-Busch on the side of it, don't steal kegs. Because you pay $75 deposit. You steal that keg, they lose $200. A craft brewer, that's a big whop to lose.
Yeah.
So that may be a thing. I would think it more likely that if they were exporting, they would be using full size barrels, and they would be rolling those downriver, and then somebody would be bringing empty ones back up.
So not only would we want cart rights, but maybe some ship rights to build riverboats.
Probably both.
Yeah.
Because you can't generally. I mean, depending on the size of the waterway, bringing empty barrels upriver is hard work, particularly without motors.
Or beer for motivation.
Yeah, but I mean, a gaggle of reanimated beasts might work.
Yeah. You don't even have to feed them, right?
and to throw a little bit of modern sort of, well, I guess not really modern, contemporary knowledge, the people who have generated the most gains in knowledge about the production of
that's a really good idea,
beer. Are actually the monks producing it. The first person who ever genuinely identified, cataloged, classified, and then cultured yeast was within the last century. And not that we didn't know it was yeast, and not that we didn't have a bucket that we could draw from to use, but the first person to truly sit down and go, let's use a microscope to understand what we're talking about and then quantify it, was a monk from a monastery in France.
So really, we take a lot of things perhaps for granted. That our knowledge, and it's so widespread, but that a lot of this has only been known in an intellectual capacity, not just as a given part of the world, in the last 100 or so years.
Yeah. Yep. And I did a really quick little bit of research on the hops side. Hops has only been in use, documented in use, since about 800 AD. So literally the last 1300 years.
And
the 5,500 before that. What's that?
Pills? P-I-L-S?
Pills
is a type of beer.
It's specifically a region in Czechoslovakia called Pilsner.
Okay.
And surprisingly enough, in the first segment we alluded to the typical American what Joe Sixpack buys on the weekend. They are an American derivative of a Czech Pilsner.
Yeah. Because the very first people who ever brewed in the United States were Czech immigrants.
Yep.
And German immigrants.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Youngling is
correct.
They're like, we're the oldest brewery in the United States that's still functioning.
Yep. Yeah, and because of that, they brought a tradition of brewing from Czechoslovakia, which a lot of people don't associate with Bohemia, but it's Bohemia.
Yeah. And dude, and that's another really interesting thing. Even to this day, the type of beer produced is extremely regional.
As in, the beer is named after the region, like Champagne is only Champagne if it's from that part of France, or...
In part, yes.
Yeah,
but styles and tastes.
like a English brown and a Belgian double look roughly the same. You like at a view, you'd be they look sort of similar, but the taste profile, the things that make a beer of that style is very specific to region. Like we always say Belgians, and then we assume that a Belgian is a Belgian. Belgium is like probably the most. Would you agree, Greg? The most diverse beer market in the world. Like they have the most unique styles to their credit.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say that's fair. Yeah,
right.
I would say that's fair.
But like if you go to Amsterdam, they've got a type of beer that they drink, that everybody drinks. Mm-hmm. And sure, you could acquire other kinds of beer, but 90% of the people are going to want an Amsterdam blonde ale.
Yeah, and if you go to Cologne in Germany, you're going to be drinking Kolsch.
Yeah,
Kolsch.
That's because Kolsch is what's there. It's just a light lager, but it's a very specific style to Cologne. That's where you get it. And if you want a Kolsch here, well, you have to import it because there's no such thing as Kolsch made outside of Cologne. The same way there's no such thing as a Lambic beer made outside of the Lambic region of Belgium. So yes,
your comments about champagne, they're all derivative.
But they're derivative, and there are traditions and standards and styles that are very specific to regions. Yeah. So you can absolutely use that to sort of say, well, this isn't what we're used to.
And that's why the theme of this town could be what it is, because
good culture.
Perhaps it produces something that is amazing and totally unique to the geography, topography, minerals, the water. There could be some thing that this region, this water source, this soil has that creates these certain set of circumstances in this process that makes this beer extremely popular outside of its specific region, thus creating an economic engine that is blowing this city up.
That can be, that could cause a whole cascade of other thoughts. What if this was a valley where a huge war was fought, and we're talking about kind of a necromantic turn of the events, for maybe cost saving and labor. But what if enough people, like 10,000 people, died here, or even more, and suddenly that changed the composition in the soil because of the presence of all of the flesh and the bones and the metals that over time have rusted and seeped and stewed and so really to make this, you do require, hopefully not in a villainous fashion, but hopefully you actually do require the people to be buried out in the fields when they die as a part of this culture in this town. And in fact, maybe even people see that as a sign of respect. When I die, put me in the field and people will drink from me for 100 years, and I'll bring a good time to people.
Scatter my ashes in the field.
Yeah. Barmaid. I'd like toss me a pint of miasma blonde. Yeah. That's what this is. This is terroir. This is terroir is a thing that applies to champagne. It applies to wine. That's why a California Cabernet is different than a French Cabernet.
That's why you can take a Malbec vine from France and put it to Southern California, and one tastes amazing. The other one tastes like a can of mashed arse.
Right. And now,
so
in this case, maybe we've got mashed arse right there in the mash tun.
that phrase then refers to that concept of it. The ground is a part of the product.
It is. It is of the earth.
Okay.
Luke can brew. Luke, as he said, he's got clean water right out his back door. I'm pulling it out of my tap. We use the same grain, same yeast, same hops,
Everything.
same recipe, same strategy for production.
Same temperature as at same times. Everything
completely different.
Huh.
Yeah. Mine will taste
Weather
better.
changes. It will impact the flavor. It's amazing.
But I can, with my water, I can brew softer, more malty beers than Greg can. Greg can brew a way more bitter and hard and abrupt beer than I could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, this speaks to the history, tradition, passion of a brewer, and why those recipes are so. One might argue they are held with reverence and protected with reverence. Nobody
and with force.
Nobody
in history
at Chimay is going to show you the recipe.
No.
They'll let you watch them brew it, but they'll never tell you how.
Yeah.
And it's because once it becomes a thing, that there's only one place that can happen. You look at alembic beer. Alembic beer is a sour, naturally fermented, wild fermented beer that relies on the fauna or the flora of a very specific location.
Yeah.
The Lambic Valley, Lambic, is the only place in the world that has the same concentrations of yeasts as they do. And it's because of the crops that grow, the flowers that grow there, the shape of the valley. Nowhere else on earth can you make it the same way.
And that's a great comment and idea, Derek. Because in the brewing process, you get what's called trub.
Yes.
So yeast and grain and just like Marmite and just terrible tasting stuff.
Marmite
and protein
and lots of protein.
Yeah.
Are in the bottom of the fermenting chamber.
Mm-hmm.
So you could absolutely have an arrangement with a horde of orcs that they get an unlimited supply of this if they provide protection to the fields.
I love how holistic this is. Like this is it's a closed ecosystem.
It absolutely.
Oh my gosh, this is amazing.
A farmer can buy a cow.
We weren't kidding, Maddie, when we said beer is the reason for the evolution away from hunter-gatherers, because every economy comes from beer, because beer was better than water.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't drink the water, so we have to have something. So we have to build a system so that we have this thing. And now regional, Greg was talking about Chimay, if you use the exact same grains and you brewed a beer on the other side of the castle wall from Chimay, it would taste totally different.
It is, holistic is a great word.
Yeah.
Because it really is. Every process starts simply and ultimately can be completed in a simple way. But it's that, and this is where terroir comes in, it's that minutia of detail. The spiders that have built their webs over top of the mashing tun. It's the flora that have infected the wood that the fermentation takes place in. It's the left behind, the leftovers that are unique within the transportation mechanisms.
Exactly. You wrapped it up right there. What makes it different?
I do say spiders, in part as a joke, but also as a very serious note. Lindemans in the Lambic Valley is a producer of Lambic beers. Yeah,
Derek's on a roll.
I love
Read
it.
that.
Yeah.
Which part?
Maybe the culture is being
addicted.
they're appalled by waste.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that idea. I love that idea. And there's one guy. Reusable. There's one guy who knows about the water and it just tears him up. Or there's so much depth that you can get out of this premise in your RP. There's so much depth.
Wow. And here we started in a generic Western European fantasy tavern as an adventurer, some scrappy first level. Like we're gonna go bonk a kobold, and we're holding a cup of ale in our hand. And look at everything that we just made as a DM, or even to consider as a player. Because now you have all these buildings. You have the spooky woods. You have spiders, or even necromancy, but it's not really bad necromancy because it's cultural. It's you
have ability for quests, the crew that takes the kegs down river has been taken sick, and we need this delivered. This job pays 15 silver pieces each. Like now you've got quests based on it as well. It's endless, man.
Yeah. Huh. You could be sent out to secure, to harvest, or goblins are threatening to burn the fields, and you can't have that happen.
No. Or the Lindemans factory in the Lambic Valley does a beer called a Creek. It's a cherry beer. And it's made by combining a brew this year with a brew from last year and a brew from 3 years ago. And it's continuously iterated year over year and blended year over year over year. There was a series done about 10 years ago or 15 years ago by a gentleman by the name of Michael Jackson, not the one who moonwalked. The Beer Hunter is what it was called. And he toured the Lindemans factory, and the vessel in which you soak the grain to extract the sugar, that process called mashing.
First of all, it's the size of my house.
Yeah, it's called mashing. His mashing system is a large vessel built 400 years ago with an armature of copper and brass. That is mechanically turned to keep this mash of oatmeal stuff going in circles. And the entire thing is covered in dust and dirt and cobwebs and spilled goop. And it is never cleaned. Ever. Because the belief is that cleaning it will change the output. So this becomes a place of worship in a way as well, because when that brewery started, and to this day that brewery does not add yeast to the beer.
They just put it on the roof.
They take the beer and they pump it into what's called a cool ship, which is a vessel about 8 inches deep, 25 feet long, and about 15 feet wide. So imagine it's a big patio.
with very, very large, deep patio.
With 2.5 to 4 inches of liquid covering its entire surface. Then they open the roof. And they come back the next day and they close the roof. And then all of that is pumped into a tank to be fermented. So the fermentation itself, if you will, is inspired by the gods. And that was initially how it was treated.
And is that the Solera casking that Plunderloot was talking about?
Maybe.
Praise the sun.
It could be. Because it is, one would argue, it's the sun that creates the plants and the fruits that the yeasts live on. It's the winds that carry those yeasts to the roof where they deposit themselves overnight in the cooling air into the vessel. So, you want to get, I mean, we can get isinglass. There's another thing we can talk about. Isinglass would never have been used in this type of time.
No.
Isinglass's purpose is like
Preventing
gelatin.
boil.
No,
I'm
isinglass.
on moss.
It's okay. Yeah, isinglass is it is extracted from fish bladders, and it is very much like gelatin. It absorbs and wraps itself around particulate, and then sinks to get it out of the way. So that's how you get clear beer.
That sounds familiar. I think I read an article locally where in the Maumee River, which flows through Toledo here, they're releasing a lot of sturgeon, I think.
Yes.
And I think in that article it mentioned that one of the byproducts of sturgeon is that material.
Yeah, isinglass. It's produced in the bladder.
Yeah.
It's not harmful, but this is, I mean, perfect example. This is another one of those things that happens now, is that vegans won't drink certain beers because isinglass is produced from fish, and gelatin is produced from usually cattle.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, like back to
they're taking the hobbits to isinglass.
Pneumonica made a really good point, Maddie. Like he said that this kind of transportation would lend itself to river piracy.
Yeah.
This could even be like we could add an unfinished road to the south. Like that could go on our map because there is such a predilection of the product getting attacked on the river that now they're building a road. Like it can go in any direction. There can be missions based on the road. There can, you know what I mean? Like from a cup of beer you could go anywhere.
So there's constant public works. This need Derek. Actually, Derek even said with his orc comment a little bit above, you might have. You were talking about different ingredients. You get a cup of beer off of the grave of orcs, and that'll be different than than others. And you also reminded me here in our part of Ohio, we have a lot of Amish, and one of their traditions is I think they call it friendship bread. And what that means is, so it's like a sourdough. It has yeast in it.
Yep.
And what they'll do is they'll knead it together, and then they'll take off like 7/8 of it, and they'll bake that into bread. And with that last eighth, they're going to roll that into the next loaf of bread. Because it's the same. And so the bread has lasted in the family for like 200 years of these Amish generations. Because it's the same yeast that grows throughout the bread, and it does change, but it's still the same yeast, so to speak.
Yeah. And that is actually that change over time is something that Luke and I have been talking about a little bit lately. The Belgian brewing tradition of doubles and triples was completely, at this point, that beer is so completely unique compared to an English or a Scottish ale.
Belgian yeast. The characteristic of Belgian beer that everybody thinks, oh, that's a Belgian. That yeast started as Scottish stout yeast.
I put a note here called mutant yeast ? And what makes it different?
Absolutely.
Another question, then, if you guys can answer this. I don't think it's from chat, but something that came up. Dwarves are often associated with this, and I think we understand why. They're very industrious, mountain, water, et cetera, so forth. Very hardy, can process alcohol. In fact, I'd probably say their poison resistance is a hindrance, at least to the effects of the alcohol, maybe not the taste. But if we're talking about things like using interesting ingredients, because look, you get chocolate beer, you get watermelon beer, and all this other stuff.
For sure.
Can you make...
Bite your tongue.
Can you make a mushroom beer?
Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Saccharomyces cerevisiae and Saccharomyces of any kind.
Yeast is a fungus.
Yeast is a fungus. It is a mushroom.
Well, I guess maybe in the traditional, like, you throw in a bunch of portobellas and mix them up, or is that really a fantasy thing?
No. Here's something interesting. Mushrooms are very specific in creating a specific chemical reaction in the human body when they're cooked. They are one of very few natural sources of umami. Umami is that sixth taste, right? Or the fifth, rather. You've got the sour, salty, sweet. What's the other one? Sour, salty, sweet, savory,
bitter,
and umami. Bitter, that's it. Bitter and umami. Umami is what gives you savory, right?
I wish you could poop ethanol as well.
Yeah. Mushrooms are very, very high in the chemical components that we also now refer to as monosodium glutamate, which is where umami comes from. And so if one were to create a beer using certain mushrooms, that could impart very unique flavors. We use a lot of things in beer. Our Christmas beer is big in spearmint and cocoa, where both are
amazing.
Where both are additions. I've done beers with jalapeno. I've done beers with. I'm looking right now at a recipe. I'm working on a recipe for a beet beer.
I think Derek just hit the nail on the head.
Nailed it. Luminescence.
But that as far as an RP, like I know that we're both beer nerds, dude, and we could go on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
Sure
and on. But that's because there is no theoretical end to it.
Yeah.
From an RP standpoint, like the real world was built on beer.
Yeah. What was it? Dogfish does a scrapple beer.
Yeah, that's gross, but yeah.
So I mean I love the concept of using and those luminescent fungus and mushrooms.
Yeah.
Maybe they have medicinal purpose. Maybe those funguses prevent infection.
Yeah.
So maybe those are used in place of hops.
Maybe the barrels are fired with orcs.
Hey, you capture enough of them, you can get something going there.
Or
it could be a burial ritual.
Or something. They don't call it penicillin, but everyone knows you drink our beer and you don't get sick. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons is it's a form that you've just invented, a liquid penicillin.
Yeah.
And then 6 years later you turn into an undead.
Hey, ooh. What if that seeds your body, right? And so after you die, because you've been drinking the spores and everything for so long, that you actually then are the fertilizer for the next generation of the same fungus. But while you're alive, it's keeping you bacteria free. It's keeping you healthy. Because hey, that's why you brew, to make the water healthy.
It could be an organism that its life cycle goes through your colon.
Your waste, yeah. That's a whole chemical process that goes on down there.
Yep.
Derek, I appreciate
Hank Hill Dwarf,
the ideas.
Merchant of propane and propane related wares.
Bobby, get away from that there mash tun.
Get away from that there mash tun.
You know what? Honestly, the technical aspects of brewing are really now just overindulgence when it comes to understanding what was never a technical process. For 8,000 years, it was take a few hunks of bread and put in jar and come back in 3 days and pour into cups. Like, it really has, it's never been about the technology until the technology existed to say, let's define this.
Dude, the technology is such that I am currently holding 5 gallons of beer minus the water.
That's it.
That's 5 gallons of beer right there.
Wow.
Gotta add a little heat and a little water and wait 2 weeks.
And so, perhaps, this brewery at the monastery, perhaps they understand it completely. And perhaps they don't. Perhaps
they're a
it's just
level of
been done
enlightenment
this way, and so they continue to do it.
And that's why it's
And it
attributed
may
to the
be-
gods, right? The
Yeah.
gods do it.
Yeah.
We just go through the rituals, the
That's
dogmatic practices.
Right, and so the
Any
practices
excuse to
could be
base the hokey
mechanical or
religion
they
on
could be
something.
dogmatic. Yeah, yeah. It's
Wow.
not just some hokey religion.
We have invented a culture. We've invented an economy. We've invented a religion, or at least maybe an aspect of one that already exists in your campaign world. We've
Again,
invented...
basically, we invented Belgium.
What? That's... Yeah, beer brewed in places of religion and dead people. And they have mountains and all sorts of fertile lands and beasts of burden, and there's probably a reason why Belgium and a lot of other places just seem to be very naturally attuned to this kind of industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And dude, like, I think no matter what city you're building, no matter what your RP, no matter what the campaign is, we added necromancy and spirits to it, but all of the infrastructure and the reason that there's fields and the reason that there's mines isn't to get metal for swords, isn't to get food. It's like this is every city.
Yeah.
Every single city has this underpinning. And then from those underpinning, you can add high elf conspiracy theory and necromancers and a fucking orc cult. I'm sorry for swearing.
Thank you.
You know what I mean? Like, there's... Like, this is the base city, and this is what they all are, because this is what they all were.
Yeah. So it is
it's
the
how
cause
they-
of and solution to all the world's problems.
I'd like to think so.
Yeah.
I'd like to think so. Yeah, I mean, to say nothing of the simple, value, the simple value of a product. I mean, we talk about cottage industries all the time now, and what is a cottage industry producing? Handmade sausage. Well, we pay 5 times more. Well, guess what? 400 years ago, you made sausage the way you did because that way it lasted through the winter. And now we pay 4 times more for it at the market because we're tired of buying it at Safeway. It really is. This was a time where the food was good. It just
Safeway
wasn't-
is the name of the grocery store in Alberta where Greg lives.
Well, and all over America. This was a time where people ate well. The flavors were good. People who knew how to cook were revered in a way. They tended to be in the inn because that's where you got the best food if it wasn't at home. And so all of these little bits and pieces can tie together. And really, for somebody developing a campaign, any one of those pieces could be built out this way, whether it's the sausage you're eating because it's just something special because it's got just that little bit of orc meat in place of pork. Whatever it happens to be, they can all be taken that way. And at their heart, they're all incredibly simple.
Yeah.
It's just a choice of how deeply we want to open them up and how much, fun we want to put into that process of opening these things up. When you unpack a thing that's simple, you find all kinds of interesting
tremendously.
opportunities. And that's one of the things that we've gotten watching you, Maddie, is that we see a simple premise at the beginning of a campaign building episode, and it's like you talk about well, we've got a mountain, we've got a stream. What is it going to look like? Where are the roads going to be? What is the village going to look like? What would keep these people from doing something, or what would make them do something? All of these things, I think, they loop around, whether it's beer or whether it's a food or whether it's a metal or anything, right?
Yeah.
When you unpack it like this, it makes it a very exciting thing to play with. And most certainly, beer is one of those things that it's fun to do this with because it's got such history, and yet it's also still so misunderstood by the bulk of people who have grown up on it.
Mm-hmm.
I watched Kavanaugh the other day in that congressional hearing or that Senate hearing, and a part of me just smirked the whole time. I don't care whether he's guilty or innocent; it's irrelevant. All I know is he said beer almost 40 times in that 2 hours. And the whole time I'm thinking, and I guarantee the guy's never had one that didn't come in a can and wasn't sold in a 6-pack at the grocery store.
Yeah.
And it just killed me. I'm like, we wouldn't be having this discussion if he was drinking Chimay.
Yeah, and there's and I do have to give you props, man. I love that you making maps in paint. It fills my heart with pleasure.
Well, keep it simple, and it's easy for you to understand and not get lost, and it's easy for your players and others to also not get lost, because just as we've done, we have entertained so many thoughts in our mind's eye by discussing it, because we're a couple guys on camera, and I have a free word processor, and I have MS Paint open, and I think between the three of us, let alone everything that you've read over here in chat, all the ideas are exploding in people's minds. All these concepts, the culture. You can imagine a cavern full of glowing fungus that people are harvesting to then put into some sort of umami, penicillin beer or something like that.
Even something simple like you're in a cavern or in a dungeon or a holding room or something like that, and you come across like 400 barrels. That prospect before this conversation was be like, is there any locked chests? Yeah. And now it's like, what's in the barrels?
Yeah. And because we've discussed this culture too, let's pretend that we're adventurers from outside this region, and we happen to find ourselves here, and we're walking past, and there's a funeral taking place in one of the fields, and you're like, I get it, it's a funeral, they're probably being buried on the farmer plot, and yet they see one of the celebrants or even people from the family take a handful of what looks like seeds and like scatters it on the body. And then they cover up the body with, cover up the body, and you kind of notice by craning your neck a little bit, that's a little bit of a shallow grave. That's not 6 feet down. What's going on here?
Yeah.
And then maybe what's going on? Is this a town of cannibals?
Oh, Derek, that's dark. So one of the things that we didn't touch
surprise
on, one of the things we didn't touch on when we were talking about culture, and I think this is a really great one to sort of put a linchpin in the whole thing.
Okay, yeah, we can wrap things up for the evening.
The brewing process is something that can be replicated on a daily basis or a weekly basis, whatever needs. Whatever frequency is required to meet the output needs of this economy. But one thing that is consistent is that it all ties back to the growing season where we're talking about, which means that there's a harvest.
Yep.
And that means that there's no more coming. So we now produce and consume at a rate that will maintain the supply until the next harvest. We have planting in the spring. We don't
like new people in the city.
We have an opportunity in the spring to start again, and so there's an opportunity for renewal, and there's an opportunity for an end for the harvest. This is why.
Spring celebrations,
the solstices in the spring and winter are so crucial in human history. Anywhere you go, they're crucial.
The old ways were that because of that reason.
Because the Nile flooded and they could plant.
Yep.
They were crucial in Great Britain and around Stonehenge, because that was the only time you could be assured that when you planted a crop that it wouldn't be frosted over and killed.
Yeah.
So these time-based things can also play into this. Could you use gentle repose for maintaining beer? Probably could.
Don't we just call that nitrogen now?
No. Actually, once you've got a keg on CO2, as long as you don't have volatiles, hop oils and stuff, it will certainly be drinkable in a year. It may not be as good, but it'll be drinkable. And then some beers need to be left in their own for a few years to mature, depending on what's
really in them. The reason that nitro is a thing is to get the beer from where it's kept to where it's served. CO2 only has so much pushing power.
Ooh.
Yeah.
You have to mix in a nitrogen because it'll push it further.
So it's more about the force than the preservative nature.
Yeah. Nitro is really about texture and about serving pressure.
Yeah. It makes your bubbles smaller and smoother.
Yep.
Yeah. It does. The bubbles are a lot smaller than CO2.
Well,
that's how you get a cascade.
A cascade.
Guinness, like the foam on a Guinness pouring back down inside.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, that's where that comes from. Is the size of the bubbles. It has nothing to do with the flavor and the taste or anything else. You
could make Dr. Pepper do that if you put it on nitro.
If you put it on nitro for a week, yeah.
Farfel, thank you for that follow. I hope that you've enjoyed it.
Farfel.
And I'm also happy, all of you who are in here commenting and participating. Gentlemen,
the chat has been excellent.
Oh my gosh. This has been an amazing time, and you know what? I would like to welcome you back and continue some of these thoughts as we talk about maybe some other aspects of brewing, maybe how it can be used. We talked about maybe adventure seeds or whatnot. We have a setting. We talked about IRL stuff. If you guys are willing to come back tomorrow, I'd like to have you, and we can pound out some more brain ideas that we can introduce into our D&D discussion. Are you up for that?
We would absolutely love to do that.
Man. I feel bad. I feel like you just had us on, and Greg and I nerded out about beer for 2 hours, and you said like 8 words the entire time.
No, it's fine. You nerded out about beer because that's what we're here to do. We're here to learn and then to incorporate it. Because look, fantasy is an expression of our reality, and beer is a reality. And well, anyway, gentlemen, thank you very much. For those of you who are in chat, I think we'll take a 10-minute break, and when we come back, I don't know, I'm not quite tired yet, so we'll have a part 3. Maybe I'll play some Undertale, speaking of underground spooky caverns, or go from there. But everyone, thank you for being a part of this, for your suggestions, and we'll meet back up for part 2 of our Oktoberfest styled celebration and exploration of beer.
You guys are awesome.
Thanks, guys.